Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am Cindy Hausner. I'm the Executive Director of Great Lakes Adaptive Sports Association. I'm also the Games Director this year, virtual games of Great Lakes. And I also am one of the track coaches here at Great Lakes Adaptive Sports Association. So hope all of you are jumping on. The panel discussion for today is on inclusion in high school and college athletics, and so thankful for the panel that we have today. Before I introduce the panelists, what I'd like to do is go over a couple housekeeping items. First of all, in order to avoid all the background noise, the attendees have been muted for the duration of the session. If you have questions, and we hope you will, for the panelists, if you can use the Q&A button rather than the chat. However, we do want to see who's out there. So, introduce yourself using the chat function. Just make sure that, that you're stating that both for panelists and attendees so we can all see. I'd also like to thank all of our sponsors that are in the background here for supporting our Great Lakes virtual games. And I've been on earlier today, and it is those of you, and I think Brian and Amanda, especially, and Carolyn know that the last 2 years our games have been in the rain and the snow, have been horrible. And I'm just like, no, the weather is like perfect. And for, if you're a wheelchair racer, I'm checking the wind. I'm like, how can the weather be this perfect? And we're sitting in Zoom. So I know for swimming, it doesn't matter that much, but for those of us that have been outside, it's perfect. So of course. So just talking about inclusion in general, why it is so important. And we were talking before we kind of went live. And for many of our athletes, it is difficult if you're with a club such as GLASA or any of the other clubs to get training in sometimes 6 days a week. So by joining a club, by joining a high school team, you're able to get that training before you go off to college, 5-6 days. And the difference between our athletes that are training a few times a week versus then training 5-6 days a week is absolutely huge. And then there's the social emotional aspect too of training with high school, training on with a college team, and really being part of something. So just to kind of clarify also, when we talk about inclusive being that the athlete may be the only athlete on that team who has a disability, as opposed to adaptive, where in an adaptive program such as U of I, Arizona, Whitewater, where all the team members have a disability. So that's kind of the definition. So for our panel, and I'm losing my voice. So for our panel today, we have Peggy Ewald, who just came off a session. And Peggy's an education consultant for US Paralympics. And she has coached in 3 Paralympic Games, 2008, 2012, and 2016. And we have Akil Whitehead, and Akil is a 2016 Paralympian, and as well as program director of adaptive athletics at San Diego State, and was behind that push. We have Carolyn Grievers, and Carolyn's was my daughter's coach, but that's not the reason she's here. So she's director of Scout Aquatics and coach of Lake Forest High School, head coach swimming and diving. And Carolyn has had a number of our swimmers, and our philosophy at GLASA for most of our swimmers is once they can swim 25 meters, we're trying to get them into a club or a high school program. And Carolyn has done an awesome job with the kids that we've sent to her for high school. And then we have Amanda Malevsky, and Amanda is a T37 and 400 meter and long jump, and she is right now training at San Diego State with the Keels program, but she was home pretty early. So right now she's training virtually with us, and hoping to get outside. And she has a couple other, she has a good USATF program that is near her as well as Amanda's been on her high school team and has also competed internationally in 4 different meets. And lastly, we have Brian Seaman at 2012 and 2016, track Paralympian, as well as a learning disability specialist at U of I, and also trains at U of I. And Brian has also competed on his high school team. So I'm going to start with, I'll start with Carolyn, because she's right there. And Carolyn, if you could share some of the successes, and if you've had challenges. I know when we first started out with the athletes way back, I think Nina was our first athlete, is that correct? Yeah,
Yes.
way back when. And so, you know, we were all learning this inclusion aspect. How is this going to work? So if you could share some of the successes and challenges and how it has worked for your high school program to have athletes with disabilities.
Well, I would say the biggest challenge that we have is communication. I think it's both a lack and fear of communication, both from the athletes and the parents, and then to us as coaches, and trying to find a way to help them get better and want to train and push themselves. With all of the athletes we've had, and we have one right now currently on the team, I've found the best thing to do is have that conversation about what they need and what they want and what the goals are, just like everyone else. And then we design a plan on how to do all of the aspects that I require, whether it's dry land or in the water activity, whatever they need before and after all of that, and making sure that they understand what's expected both from high school academically and physically and everything. After we have that conversation and we make a plan, it is just incorporating them into our sports and just making accommodations wherever it's necessary. And I've learned probably so much from these athletes on how to adjust and make things work when it does seem like it's been hard to make it accessible, but it always ends up being something fantastic, and they really do excel. And once we get them incorporated, they just flourish, and it's fun to see them really have a good time when they get themselves in a good, comfortable place on the team.
Okay, any biggest success that you can, or is there not one?
I would say seeing my last 2 girls be state champions in the IHSA. Our high school association has a disability level, and we've had both of our athletes be champions, and for them to see all the hard work pay off has been really, really fun. Okay,
great. I cannot see all of you, but hopefully, can you guys see me? All of a sudden you all cut out, so I'm going to continue going. Brian, if you can share your experience in high school and you know, how that worked out, both you know, your challenges, and maybe there were not any challenges but successes also.
Yeah, so I started, just for time reference of everything, I started high school back in 2004. And I was not an athletic person at all. I had no intention of ever really getting involved in sports. I kind of knew that adapted athletics existed, but there really wasn't any. The closest program to me was probably close to about an hour and a half away. And so that was not something that was really feasible for my parents to commit to. And even then, like, I wasn't even aware of that until later. But so I actually got started in high school. I started wheelchair racing in high school, having never done any form of adapted athletics before. My high school track coach actually came up to me on the first day of high school, and he was in the lunchroom, and he asked me if I had a broken leg or if I was in my wheelchair permanently. And I told him that I was in the chair permanently. And then he asked me, he's like, "Oh, yeah, cool. Do you want to come out for the track team?" I was like, I just told you I can't walk. And he was like, "Yeah, I know." He's like, I've seen some other kids at the state meet compete in wheelchairs. Like, they go, like, they're in a special chair. He's like, "Is that something you'd want to try?" and really not knowing what I was getting myself into, I kind of said yes. And I said yes, thinking I would probably do it for about a year. And so after I said yes, my high school went and raised money for my first racing chair. So they bought me a racing chair and wheels and tires. And then I got hooked up with the Children's Specialized Hospital Lightning Wheels team in like northern New Jersey. And so they got me measured for a chair. But sort of the arrangement was like they would sort of teach me the kind of mechanics of how to like use the racing chair. But I could only go to train with them once a week because that's, you know, it was so far away. And then I was spending every other day training with my high school team. And so I kind of took the knowledge that I learned from like how to use compensator, things like that. And then I just sort of I was doing the workouts with my high school team. And so my experience is very atypical from, I think, what a lot of younger students sort of have to go through in navigating this sort of realm of adapted high school athletics. But for me, it was something that was pretty seamless. My coach felt very strongly that I was included in all aspects of the team. So whether or not it was practicing. So I also didn't know, like, so we didn't know about like rollers and things like that. So like when it was raining or snowing, I was outside. And so knowing what I know now, like that's just, I can't believe we didn't know that. But so it was one of those things that I was always included in terms of whatever the workouts they were doing is what I was doing. And then my coach also felt very strongly the same about meets as well. Some schools have sort of adopted a model of the athlete with a disability will compete sort of in their own event just by themselves on the track. And my coach was like, no, you're a member of this team. You do distance events. You're on the track with the distance team when they're running their events. And so we actually contacted every single school that we would be competing against, and we worked with them. And we tried to figure out a way that, you know, especially those first like 1 and 2 years where I was the only student using a racing chair. And so we figured out a way to make things work. And so when I did sprints, we had a plan in place. And then when I did the distance races, we had a plan in place. And by the time I was a senior, it was like, I was so well known, it was no longer an issue of like logistically figuring things out. It was, I was competing and I was racing. And that kind of led me then to continue to keep racing. And then, you know, as you start wheelchair racing, you always hear about U of I, University of Arizona, things like that. And so I looked at both of those schools, and then I wound up out at the University of Illinois training program in 2008, and I haven't left since. So now I have a job here. And so, yeah, so that trajectory has sort of, again, I was very lucky in sort of the experience that I had. But it was because of the mindset that my coach and my school adopted about having me included on the team, and that it wasn't something that was separate or different, but rather I was a member of the team and they were going to make it work.
Ryan, one of the questions that I get all the time, especially of our wheelchair athletes that maybe are just starting out, is the athletic director will say, do I need a separate coach for that athlete? So I'm just curious how that worked at your high school.
Yeah, no, that was my coach and I, seriously, he's like, I remember, I looking back and I remember him telling me, he's like, I don't know what I'm doing. You don't know what you're doing. He's like, we'll figure it out together. And so it was one of those things that you, as an athlete, like you're there to train and compete. And so when I first started, it was just like, okay, we're going to just work on, you know, it'd be like he was working with one of his, you know, the other high school athletes who's ambulatory, who's never run track before. And so, okay, we're just going to do some like light sort of stuff, get you going. We're not going to have you just automatically start doing, you know, 400-meter drills. And so we sort of worked our way up to it. We worked our way to figuring out how everything, you know, what I was capable of doing, what I liked doing. And so that was, you know, I really enjoyed the distance racing. And so that's sort of where we put my focus. But then because I was a part of a junior, the Lightning Wheels team, we also had to throw in some sprint stuff as well, because I was, you know, you do every event when you're a junior. So, which is odd too, now that the way that the roles have reversed, and that I'm much more of, for the Paralympics, like my medal potential events really are the sprints as opposed to the distance racing. So, but I think that, no, you don't need a separate coach. The coach just needs to sort of be willing to have those conversations. Everything, there's a lot of unknowns, and I think there's a fear of unknown and sort of like, I don't know what to do, and that's, I think, part of the problem, and people aren't willing to have that conversation. And so we had a very good relationship, my coach and I, and it was just like, okay, let's talk. And we talked every day about sort of what, what we were going to do for training that day. And then sort of if I felt like I needed to do something different or things like that. But there's never any need for sort of a special coach.
Okay, it's interesting because I know athletes that I've worked with, many of them, they do not have a special coach at all. They're same as yourself. And then we have had, other athletes that the school will want to provide an additional coach. So that's why I thought I'd ask that. Peggy, if you want to share with us a bit, your experience with some of the collegiate swimmers, and if there have been challenges. I certainly know there's been a lot of successes. In fact, one of Ahalia, one of your swimmers, was emailing, Cindy, do you have a pool? Can you find a pool? And so, that is one of our challenges right now. But Peggy, if you could kind of share your experience with some of the collegiate swimmers.
Yeah, not only collegiate, but my actual beginning with Paralympic. Do I need to share my screen?
Nope, you're good. You're perfect.
My experience started with a high school athlete. I was coaching age group in high school at our local area. And one of the high school athletes on volleyball had a severe accident and rendered a quad. And part of her therapy was in the pool. And so my athletes would talk to her when she was in the pool, just rehabbing. And I knew the family. So I just offered to teach her swimming because that was going to be the only medium she was going to, likely be able to do at least through the rehab and on. And that just grew. So we went from, helping her become very fluid and movement oriented in the water to putting her on the high school team. At that time, we didn't have a bus that had a lift on it for her chair. So in the beginning, her mom would transport her until the high school AD could get us arranged a different bus for the team. And we would train in old pools in Ohio. The 50s, they built pools down in a dungeon. And so getting her down was not accessible at all, or even being able to wheel her chair around the deck. So the guys on the team just would pick her chair up and her in it and carry her down the steps to the deck of the pool. Every coach, I let them know ahead of time that we were working with one of our wheelchair bound athletes. All the officials, I would remind them, this goes back into 2003, 4, and 5. I'm an educator, so inclusion was the only option in my mind. Was just, she was a team member, everyone was going to embrace it. She did workouts with lanes with our other swimmers, and there was no difference. And our whole entire team culture changed because they'd look down the lanes and see her grinding out work just like they were. And we didn't have complaining. We had a complete turnaround of, this is a whole team, and everybody just kind of embraced that concept of inclusion. And that's my introduction to Paralympics then. She was very successful. Went on and received a bid to Athens. I started working with her in 2003. By 2004, she had secured a bid to Athens, but she also was going to be a freshman at Harvard, a very, very, very intelligent woman. And she would have had to defer her entry because they only start in the fall. She knew that in 2008, it would fall between undergrad and graduate work. So we made the decision that if that wasn't going to work for her to start school on time, she was going to defer, or she was not going to defer. She was going to give up her position and let another athlete go to games, which she did do. She swam with Harvard in different capacities through the 4 years. Her last year, she was actually on the squad in meets, but she always competed with them. She just didn't travel. So again, it's those communications like Carolyn talked about, Brian talked about. Communication has to be there, and you have to set the plan. You have to encourage them participating and meeting the same expectations of the team with what they're able to do. So my focus started through high school, and then of course on into the collegiate arena. When I started coaching at Ohio Northern University, we didn't have a facility that was accessible to her to come and train with me. Even though she was at Harvard, when she'd come home for break, she would come home and train with me. So the university embraced that. They took out all the ledges between the showers and the locker room so that she could roll her chair through. Again, it's from the mindset of inclusion, and you just need to go out and advocate for what's right. Even though we were a private institution and they didn't have to comply with ADA, they were willing to, because it was a support of good. It just was the right thing to do. So those were some of the early challenges. Of course, I've had a lot of success in my college team. Inclusion, we were able to bring a 3-time Paralympian to our campus from Beijing Paralympic Games. And she came into our pharmacy program. I knew her from Team USA work, and she competed on my college team. She could score points. She was that good in our roster depth and within our conference that supported including para-athletes. We've had others that we have also included, and we were kind of a model Division III team in our conference to create more inclusion of athletes. We brought them in and let them compete during our conference meet from other institutions as well. So I think it's how much do you want to commit to including? And if you are willing to ask, I asked for the world. I asked for everything I could, and some things didn't happen the first year, but then we would work towards it the next year. And so I think that people are willing to do the right thing if you approach it in the right manner and you have early conversations to kind of set up a plan and figure it out. How are we going to do this? How can we make this work for everybody? And so for me, it was always inclusion, and never a doubt that there wouldn't be a full team experience for any para-athlete that I had a part of my own program as a home coach. And then of course with Team USA, my first experience with Beth Colby opened the door to the whole para movement for me, and her life is, you know, I'm indebted to her opening doors for me. So it's a two-way street. I probably learned more from her and all the para athletes than I could have learned from any other experiences on how do you be resilient? How do you persist in the face of some challenges to help athletes be the best version of themselves? And how do you help coaches be the best version of themselves through education? I'm an education consultant for Team USA, creating educational materials for our athletes, going around grassroots, teaching coaches how to take these para athletes into their programs. They already have a toolbox. They should possess the coaching tools they need. It's just, here's a few more to add to it to adapt that. Let me shorten your learning curve. Let me throw some ideas out there. You fit it to the athlete's needs. You know, maybe what I did with my S3, my wheelchair bound athlete doesn't work for yours, but here, let's look at the basic foundation of biomechanical things that have to happen in the stroke development, and how can we adjust that in order to get progression for them in the water. So I think it can be what you want it to be. You just have to be willing to think outside the box and ask and keep asking. If the door closes, you just open another one.
Okay, great. Amanda, I'll let you go and kind of share some of your challenges, because I know there have been some, and then successes also.
Okay, so I've been doing track and field since I was about 9 or 10 years old, so I've had the privilege of kind of growing up with doing adaptive sports, especially with GLASA. And when I was in high school, some of it was good and then some of it was not so good. So my first 3 years of when I was in high school, everything was great. And, I had to really advocate for myself. And I think a lot of the times parents think that they need to advocate for their children, but it should really be the athlete that advocates for themselves because they know what they want to do and they know their goals, rather the parents are just supposed to be there to support themselves. And so for me, it was more like, this is what I need, and then this is what like you can do to help me, because a lot of the time a lot of like officials at track meets were really like hesitant to like let me use an adaptation that I needed, because I use like a little platform with the starting blocks, and a lot of the time the officials would be like, what are you doing, what are you using, and then I'd have to go in a whole spiel as to why I need to use it and explain why I need it. And so a lot of the time it would just be communication between me and all the coaches, and a lot of the time it would work. But when I was a senior in high school, we had we got a new head coach, and the old coach, he had been doing it for years, and he kind of helped me feel comfortable on the team. I was in meets every single week, almost twice a week, and I was in almost all my events. But when I was a senior, I almost never was in meets, and it was really disappointing. And at the time, I really wanted to quit because I was so sick and tired of being on the sidelines, even though all the other coaches knew that I had the drive to still compete no matter my disability. But the new head coach just had a complete different mantra, and despite the communication, she really wouldn't listen to me, which was really difficult. So I really had to just kind of keep in the mindset that my high school training, my high school experience was just training for my Paralympic season. So whenever I would go to GLASA practices, that would be really where I'd thrive and train, because they knew how to train me and they knew what I needed, and I never really had to question why they were kind of telling me to do certain things, whereas all these other coaches in my high school, like, they wouldn't go out of their way to like help me be the best that I can be, because I never like lifted weights in high school. And even though I wanted to, I expressed the need that I really wanted to try and learn to lift weights. They were kind of too scared, and they kind of saw me as a liability instead of as a learning experience, which was really frustrating for me because I knew I could do it in an adaptive way, but they just weren't patient to try and help me learn it. So that's why I really thrived with GLASA since forever. And so I think it's just really important for students to advocate for themselves no matter what, and just to make your coaches listen. And even though like they may not listen, that you always have Cindy and Dave to always like be there for you, and if they need to get involved, they will. And so now that I'm in college, it's a completely different experience. Like, I'm actually lifting weights, and I've never done that before, which is such a good and refreshing experience, because I never thought that I could do certain weights and certain exercises, because my coaches in high school didn't take the time to try and teach me an adaptive way to do it. So now that I'm in college, it's a completely different, more positive experience. And even though my season was cut short this year, I can't really like tell what the track season will be like, but because my training experience has been so positive this year, I'm very excited for the upcoming 3 years. But just for athletes that are in high school and even in middle school, because I did track as well in middle school, you just really need to advocate for yourselves.
Amanda, how did you find San Diego State and, I remember talking to your mom at a meet, and I'm like, oh my God, she's going to kill me because San Diego State's all the way across the country. But why did you choose San Diego State versus a school that might be closer to you?
Well, so one of the reasons was because of the weather, because I think you know that I hate Illinois weather and I want to be outside all the time. And so when you told me that San Diego State was starting a program, I just kind of wanted it right away, because I knew that there weren't really that many programs out there, because even though I really liked U of I, it was a wheelchair program, and I would like reach out to people, and I really didn't get any good information back about maybe joining the team just as an ambulatory athlete, and I was reaching out to athletes on the team, and they didn't really give me a lot of positive feedback, so I was a little disappointed, even though I did, like, that was my safety school if I didn't get into San Diego State, and I just kind of knew that that was where I wanted to go for my education as well, because that was the only school I applied to for my degree that I want. But for San Diego State, I just kind of took a chance because I knew that, like, the coaches, they're for ambulatory athletes, which I always wanted. And like in high school, ambulatory athletes don't go to state. And that's really frustrating because even though I'm disabled, I'm not disabled enough to have my own standards to go to state. And it's really frustrating to see all my wheelchair athlete friends that are from Illinois get to go to state. And then I'm not, because I have to run these ridiculous times that are able-bodied times in order to go to state. So I knew that if I wanted to continue in college, I'd have to take a chance literally anywhere if I wanted to continue to run at college. So basically, I just kind of asked Akil all these kinds of questions, and then I was like, this is where I want to go.
Okay, just to clarify for everybody that's listening, that there are many states that have standards for athletes who compete in racing chairs. There are, so that the athlete can go to state, and there are a number of states that have standards for the ambulatory athlete to go on to state. Illinois does not have those standards. So with swimming also, there's many states that have standards so the athlete can compete at state. Are still states that don't. So it does vary state by state. So hopefully in the future, right? Akil, if you could share, you know, your journey in regards to training first as an athlete, and then, you know, kind of the journey as to how the San Diego Adaptive Athletic Program became about.
Sure. One of the first things I should probably talk about is my high school experience was very, I think, similar to Brian's, where, and even as I'm hearing Peggy and Caroline speak, and even Amanda, your first set of coaches, I should say, my high school coach had a mindset of inclusion. He saw me run kind of just with the team at first, and just decided to, you know, just to make sure that I was part of everything that was going on. And I think that's something that's really, really important. The mindset of all of the coaches and people talking about this is from a state of inclusion. So, you know, we did have some challenges with like kind of like learning the weight room, not really knowing, you know, in depth about what cerebral palsy was at the time and how to maybe train and work with that. But he was adaptable and made sure I was included. So at the time, California has this now, but at the time there wasn't like a state championships that included para athletes or anything like that. That got developed actually 2 or 3 years after I graduated high school. But regardless, I still, you know, I got to compete at certain events. There were some events with faster races where I didn't compete, but I was always part of the team and always part of the mix. And eventually, by the time I got to my senior year, you know, I was sort of on the Paralympic track, and that's when my training changed tremendously, where, you know, I started to get much better at the sport. So I started to get good enough to win a few points for the team at, you know, weaker sort of competitions, which, you know, felt great for me and, you know, kind of helped me push forward. By the time I was a senior, I was 100% introduced to Paralympics. Here in San Diego, there is an Olympic Training Center, or at least then it was called the Olympic Training Center here in San Diego. And my head coach happened to run against the Coach Cruz, who was the head of the Paralympic program over here. He happened to run against him in college. So he just kind of messaged him and said, hey, I know you're doing this at Paralympics now. You know, I have a kid over here with cerebral palsy. He's been running with me for a while. Oh, you know, and he made that introduction for me. And what kind of happened though is I started to ask a lot of questions about college to him because he seemed like the level after college, and there was just this big kind of like, what are the athletes like, you know, with like me, so to speak, what do they do when they come to the college arena? Do they go to college? Do they go to college after the Paralympics? Like, what are the situations and what are the opportunities? And from that, it also led me to kind of ask around in San Diego, the UCSD, USD, San Diego State, you know, what do you guys do with people with physical disabilities? And to that point, unfortunately, you know, I didn't get very, either got no response or, you know, very like, hey, I see what you're doing. I see your resume, but, you know, I have an all girls team, or you know, I was kind of met with some barriers there. So once I kind of brought those barriers to Coach Cruz over here, you know, we were able to kind of develop a situation for me to kind of train. So I noticed immediately that I was allowed to train at the Olympic Training Center, but I got introduced to like very like there's like different levels, right? Essentially, the better athlete that you are, the more access you have to things. So he was able to get me like the basic, hey, you can get on the track and let's just start there. And if you still want to go to college, why don't you just choose the UCSD or San Diego State or something like that, and you could go commute from the college to here, and you know, we just kind of made it work. So I was very thankful for that opportunity, because if he did not do that, then I would have been sitting duck, right? I couldn't train at any colleges. You know, the high school team was like, you know, we've done the best that we can for you, but you really need something that could help you propel, you know. But so I was able to do that. So in light of everything, right? So I was attending San Diego State as a student, and going to the Olympic Training Center to train basically almost every day. I started to just hear and talk to more people on Team USA, right? You go to World Championships, you see the Brian Seamans, right? And you get to see that, hold up, wait, there's a whole bunch of people from University of Illinois here, right? And I just started to pay attention to some of those things. By the time 2016 hit, I realized that there were some college programs out there, and most of them, for the most part, were wheelchair based, and there were just on the kind of ambulatory side, kind of like mostly inclusive opportunities, right? You would hear more about a athlete that was training at, you know, Notre Dame or at so-and-so college or at Georgia or this, and they just, you know, happened to be training with the track team, and, you know, they kind of worked out some sort of situation with them. And I heard plenty of situations too where, you know, hey, I couldn't find a college situation or something like that, so I just chose to go this route. So to me, it sounded like there was structure on one side, and then there was like kind of hit or miss. And I didn't really like hearing the hit or miss, because there's too many good athletes that, hey, if you just gave this athlete these resources from the beginning, you know, where could they go, right? And you know, of course, I didn't know Amanda or any of the athletes in my program at the time, but I just knew, I'm like, okay, there has to be the younger generation of athletes that are going to come across the same issue. So I decided to just I decided to start. I didn't know I was going to start one at the time, but I decided to just advocate heavily to have not just an inclusive adaptive sports program, I would just say full on, like, no, this is, I want something like University of Illinois, where, no, if you're an ambulatory athlete, you can come run for San Diego State University, and all your teammates are going to have a disability of some sort. Maybe your disability, maybe not, but, you know, we're all going to be the disabled athlete group here. So that's kind of where that started. And, you know, fortunately, I've been able to just kind of grow the program over time. Really not just with me, it's really just, I've been fortunate to come across more people that believed in that idea, and that believed in this idea of not just inclusivity, really just making sure that there is an opportunity for athletes with disabilities to compete in college. And again, I've just been very fortunate that, you know, there's now a group of people around me that believe in the same idea, and that, you know, are supporting our athletes like Amanda.
Okay, great. We have some question and answers, so I'm going to go that and then come back. So let me just go into what we've got here. Thanks for our state has just created a wheelchair track and field division upon our assistance for our daughter to be able to compete with her peers. Is it possible for her to compete at a state track meet? Does it have to be 100, 200, 400? Is there, I have a feeling, what state is this? Is there any swimming time standards for kids with disabilities to be able to swim at a state high school swim meet? Feels like an uphill battle. I don't know what state you're from, but what I can tell you is that it really does vary by state, from state. And I would say, I'll answer that, and then if anybody else wants to add to it, is making sure that you have an advocate. That could be a coach, an athletic director, somebody at your school is going to be excited about you competing. So I would say find that advocate, whoever that might be, and that will assist. So I'm happy to share what knowledge I have, and I don't know if anybody else that's on the screen wants to take that question, but it does vary state by state. Let me see the next one. Does it make sense to focus on 1 to 2 high schools, or should we try to get an entire high school athletic association involved? What do you suggest? I mean, I would focus on a district and then state, but I'll open that up to if anybody else wants to add.
Sure. Let me just touch on that point for a moment, because I believe it's important to get a school or two kind of like on board, so to speak. So I think what made it, as I'm hearing like kind of like Brian, when I heard Brian kind of lay out his story for us, it sounded like, hey, at first, there were some sort of challenges, and but by the time it got to senior year, all the logistics were sort of like figured out, right? So I think when you go to an association in the beginning, right, all they're going to see are logistic issues or this and this, and kind of come at you with all of the challenges, right? If you kind of maybe let them know, hey, we're planning on maybe doing this and we're trying this at this school, and you kind of just keep their ear, and then by the time you've sort of figured out all the challenges and things that they say or that they could say, to you, with maybe your 1 or 2 schools as an example, I think that makes a really strong case to then, have the sort of association or athletic association get behind the initiative. I don't know the very details of what happened here in California, but in California, I do know that there was an advocate on the CIF, or the California Interscholastic Federation side, that believed in the inclusive model. And then there were a few schools that were already doing it. So it was like, hey, just copy these schools. And they already answered this, and this. And then it became, oh, of course. Now let's go ahead and do it. Of course, right? So anyway, that would just be like kind of like my thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think what Akil was saying is exactly right. I mean, it wasn't as if with my experience, like, we went in right away and said like, okay, we had it all figured out. It was sort of, like I said, my coach had reached out to each of the schools that we were going to be competing against and just sort of said, hey, like, I have an athlete on my team who has a disability. It wasn't like, there's a kid in a wheelchair who just wants to come on the track and race this meet. It's like, I have an athlete on my team who has a disability. And so this is what, like, this is what the events we want him to do this meet. And then like, we figured it out. And so I think if you go to like officials, right, I think going to officials right away, they love to say that safety is like their biggest, like crutch, so to speak, in terms they can just say safety issue and then just pretend like the conversation didn't exist. But again, there are models of success throughout the country. And I think that's what you need to focus on, is that this has been done and it's been done well and done effectively. And there is no reason why any athlete who has a disability, and I'm speaking from the track side of things, but I mean, realistically, and it can be applied to any sport, should not be able to compete. There are ways to do it, and there are ways to make these athletes included on the team. And so I think that, again, there are models out there, and it's just finding what model works best. I think one of the questions had said, like, for the track events specifically, it was the 1, 2, and 4 and shot put. That I think has really come, I think that's, I don't know what state you're from, but that sort of has become sort of the model of events that have been allowed for track events at different state meets. When I was in high school, the wheelchair events were the 100, 400, 800, and 1600. And so that was in New Jersey at the time. But that, I don't think that changed. I know they added shot put now, but I think they also try to look to see what events other athletes from across the state would realistically compete in, because they realistically won't put on an event that has one athlete with a disability in it, like the 1600, if only one person's doing it. So I think they choose the lower distance events because they feel like they'll get more athlete participation that way. Despite that's a whole other issue as well. But realistically, they know that most of the athletes can do a 1, 2, and 4. And so I think that's kind of why they've chosen those as the main events.
Okay, this is for anybody. I'll just throw out the next question. How can high school teams provide a more valuable experience for Paralympic athletes? So I'm assuming this is for an athlete who is in high school who is either has gone to the Paralympics or is getting there. If anybody wants to add, whoever's asked that question, feel free to add, but anybody, or maybe a higher level if they're not higher level athlete.
Well, I would think if the athlete has like Paralympic potential, they should probably already be in contact with like Charisse and Joaquin, and on the track side of things, or whoever the high performance directors of their sport are. And so my guess is that you could put them in touch with them if they want to share resources that way. That'd probably be my suggestion. Say, hey, if the coach feels like they're unable to, that they want to really make sure that their workouts are effective. Because so for instance, like when I was working with my high school team, I was doing their workouts, and now that as soon as I got to U of I and started training there, wheelchair racers don't train the way that able-bodied runners should be training. Like you should be doing. I should have been doing an entirely different program, but it worked for me for the time because I was learning what I was doing. So had my high school coach been put in touch with Adam Blakeney, for instance, I probably would have been doing some different workouts as well, but we probably would have done some kind of incorporation there. But again, just to make sure that I was still doing the team workouts, because again, I'm a member of the high school team. And so, but I think, just encouraging them to reach out to like the coaches of athletics or swimming. I think that probably just is a good contact to have.
Okay, anybody else on that question?
With Paralympic swimming, I created a webinar and a frequently asked question for club swimming and for collegiate swimming. Our website has a lot of information that can assist through the process of an athlete wanting to swim in college or swim club while they're in college, how to approach that entire situation, information just about the different divisions for swimming. It's all swimming specific, but it can apply to any athlete looking for a collegiate sport experience as well. Some of it is generic information in how you can approach coaches, how you can approach the college search process. It would be a similar situation for a high school. Again, I think it's just having those conversations and providing feedback from states that have incorporated that sport at the high school level, getting a model that you could pass on to your key people shortens their work in researching how to do that. But the National Federation of High School Athletics is open to listening and working, and they may be a resource for high school programs or athletic directors to find out what's happening around the nation in the states that are making it work.
Okay, great. I'm going to go to the next one. In Louisiana, it's frustrating to compete as a paraswimmer in USA swim meets. They clump all special needs together, intellectual and physical disabilities. Our disabled coordinator for Louisiana swimmer's daughter has Down syndrome, so all paras are clumped as Special Olympics. My daughter has no interest in competing in this category, but cannot compete with typically developing kids. What are your recommendations? I don't know if Pam carries on this call, but Pam, if you are, I would say you could, you know, being from Louisiana yourself. So I'll let our swimming, either Peggy or Carolyn comment.
I don't mind, but Carolyn, feel free to jump in here as well. I think that if you want to be included, it pushes you to swim with the traditional swimming group. My para athletes never wanted to be excluded into those special heats of just para swimmers unless there was a purpose for it, or they were trying to help grow some new people into the sport itself. I think it's like any swimmer. You know by your time where you stand, it's having the competition opportunity to swim in a meet, swim with your peers, to be with them. So in USA swim meets in general, age group wise, or wherever that falls, you can swim in a prelim session. You may not get a final session, but you can swim with your peers, you can swim with your team, you can have your coaches. You don't have to be separated out until you go to a para swim meet that is specific for para. Most of my para athletes who are not Special Olympic athletes, which that division, you know, is part of my education process when I deliver educational introduction to US Paralympics, is always to make that distinction between para and Special Olympics, because it is different. And so a para athlete typically would not want to swim in a heat of Special Olympic athletes. So I think that would be educating the USA swimming organizers of that meet maybe, and see what can be done to make that, I guess, more acceptable for everyone to have an opportunity. So I know I didn't really give you any real good direction there. Carolyn, you want to jump in and help me out here?
I was going to mirror almost exactly what you said. And, you know, most of my para athletes, we swim in, you know, dual meets and invitationals, just with our own, you know, normal times that we have, and you can compete with everybody. The only time we really have that difference is at the state level, so state championships or you get into sectionals or zones. And for USA Swimming now we have a new like different way of grouping everything and new time standards for that, so that's another route to go down. But yeah, I think there's other ways to go about this and find new connections.
Okay, I'm the next one to Brian, Akil, and Amanda. When you first started your sport, how long did it take you to really get into it and pick the events that you're now, you know, training for? I know, Akil, you're retired, but you know, Brian had alluded to you do all the events, and I certainly know with Amanda, we started doing all the events. So how did you narrow that down to what you guys are doing now?
So like I said, I've been doing this since I was like 9 years old, but I've been doing track. But when I started, I did wheelchair tennis, I did swimming, I did adaptive skiing. So I did a bunch of stuff. And it's funny, the question, when I started, I absolutely hated track. I didn't like to run, I didn't like to exercise, but then the more I did it and the older I got, I kind of started to appreciate it, because like my mom really pushed me to do it because I was with kids like me, and I was socialized with kids like me, because growing up in an elementary school of like in a class like 100 kids, my brother and I were the only disabled kids in our school at the time when we were little. And so just to be around those kids like me kind of pushed me to start to like it. And then when I was about 12, 13, 14 years old, I made standards to go to my first international competition. And I was like, wow, I am starting to actually like track and field. I didn't think I was that good because I just did it because my mom made me do it. And I think that's just really important too. And so then right when I started like doing international competitions and started going to like the adult competitions, that's when I started specializing. So I stopped doing swimming and I stopped doing all of the track and field events. Like I did pretty much all of the events except the super long distance because I'm an ambulatory athlete and I don't want to do that. So I started focusing on the sprints and long jump when I was about 15 or 16.
Okay, Brian, how about you?
Oh my God. So I am like the least athletic person in the entire world. Like seriously, somehow I got really lucky that my coach asked me to do track and I got like good at it because I did swimming in junior nationals. I looked like a drowning fish. I didn't even try basketball because I'm just not coordinated. Anything with coordination. Seriously, I got so lucky that like somehow I'm good at track. So sports was never really something that I was like good at. So for me, it was, when I started, I thought that I would only do it for a year. I told this guy that I would do it and I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. Nor did I realize how much work it is to go in a racing chair, especially to get one that fits and all of that stuff. And it wasn't until it was honestly the camaraderie from being on a team that kept me going, because I was like, my friends were on the team, so I kept doing it that way. And then as I continued to practice more, I got better, and then I got recruited to come to U of I. And so then I just came into this program. When I started to specialize on events, I think it was really honestly after I don't know, because I still do a lot of I still do marathons. I do the distance events on the track. I'll try to get top 3 for Tokyo to get a start right for the 1500 and 5000. So I'll still do those events because I think that there's with wheelchair racing at this level, there's a little bit of you need to have the distance training, but you also need to have the sprints to get that sharp. It's like a sharpening stone almost to get that ability to attack and be prepared for things, those high speed efforts. But I have focused more on sprints probably after the 2012 games, mainly because I saw that was where I looked at my strengths as an athlete. And while I enjoy the longer distance events, my skill set and my abilities are more attuned for a sprinter. And so I started focusing on those a little bit more.
Okay, I'm gonna, we've got 3 more questions. Our panelists, are you okay time-wise? Otherwise, if any of you need to get off, feel free to get off. Otherwise, I will go through the questions. Peggy, the next one's for you. Coach Peggy, are you still who I direct my college coaches to contact information on para-training?
Sure.
Okay, and then next one, Peggy, so appreciate how important is it for para-athletes to have a scoring opportunity for their team at a state meet? This has been a major debate in our area. So Carolyn wants to jump into.
What do you mean have the opportunity? How important? That kind of depends on a lot of individual goals, team goals, futuristic goals for your high school, your conference, your state. I think every athlete, there are non-disabled swimmers who aren't scoring. So I guess having looked at the collegiate arena for probably more of my years, more recent, Not all my college swimmers got to score either.
Carolyn, any thoughts? Or sorry, Peggy, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Okay.
Well, I've got two sides to this. In our state, we do have scoring for our disability athletes. However, it has to have a certain number of athletes in the two divisions to actually do it. And we've only had it in the last eight years of including disability athletes. I think we only had it score once, unfortunately. So we're still working on that. I'm also the disability chair for Illinois Swimming, and we recently had a conversation about these motivational time standards that the central zones have. And Illinois is not a state that actually scores at the state level for age group or the senior state level. But I do know other states do, like Michigan. Their athletes compete in prelims, and then they have specific events for in finals, and they actually do score points for their teams. So, you know, there are states out there that actually do love getting any of their athletes to come up and participate at the state level, and they might have a little bit more attendance at those states. It's not always fair, and we're still working on it in all the states. And I think most states are trying to work together to actually have something that's blanketed equally across all the states.
I think that equal blanket is something that we need to reach for, so that it is uniform across the state, and it helps states that aren't moving progressively with it. But I think there are stumbling blocks to it yet in trying to find that. But I think USA Swimming motivational and their new standards is a way to adapt that into the state level as well. Wisconsin was very successful with their state meet as well. Ohio, just my stomping grounds in Ohio, they just implemented it this year at the state level. So the more and more California does, I think the more and more states that work together, again, through the National High School Federation of Athletics, you know, if they can bring those powers to be, to find a uniform way of applying that is gonna allow it to be rolled out more across the nation, and in the end will be helpful. So yeah, I don't think it's perfect yet, but it's definitely progressing to that point that they'll need to have some way of incorporating a scoring system for athletes. But NCAA, just to bring you up to speed with that, it's not going to happen with a separate scoring system because all of the divisions have X number of competitors, and they can't create a separate division or a separate scoring system or a separate class of people, so to speak, to kind of maybe not use all the politically correct terminology there, but it creates a lot of problems within the NCAA format for the number of competitors that you're allowed to score for a team.
Okay, great. This is last question, and this is to the athletes. So, and I'm going to start with Akil, and we'll wrap this up. What is the favorite thing of your particular sport? So, all three of you of athletes here are all track, so and long jump. So, Akil, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I guess when I was competing, it was winning, I guess.
That's a good answer.
You love to win. You love to compete against. I think I'm not sure let me speak for me. When I figured out that there were other people with CP to compete against, you know, I was like, oh my goodness, you know, I've been competing against able bodies my entire life. This is going to be a piece of cake. It wasn't necessarily a piece of cake, but it was very thrilling. So that sense of competition and competing was good. When I look back on it, now that I'm kind of outside of the space, you know, it's not only the thrill of competition that was great, but everything that it did for my body, I really appreciate right now, because I'm just overall just significantly, you know, stronger. I just move better. And so all of the sort of like health and wellness aspects and some of those habits that I created as an athlete that kind of go into my life now are, I appreciate those a lot more right now.
Okay, Brian, and then we'll finish up with Amanda.
For me, I think at first, as I started to get a little bit better, it was kind of like Akil said, like winning and doing really well. That was something that, that's what I loved most about it. As I've gotten older and kind of something that my attitude has sort of shifted about racing in general. And it's something that a message I kind of want to pass along to all the younger kids that are listening is that sports provide an outlet and an avenue for you to maintain a healthy lifestyle and to get out there and be active and healthy. And that possesses such long-term benefits. And that for me, working out every day now, it's, yes, I still have goals and I try to reach those goals. And I'm still training for, you know, the games and things like that. But for me, at the end of the day, the thing that I love most is just that feeling, that general health and well-being that I'm getting, both physically and mentally, just from like doing a workout, doing something every day. And that's something that set goals and try to work hard, but also at the same time, make sure that you are, you know, working out and just staying healthy, because overall in the long run, that's what's most important.
Okay, and Amanda?
I think for me, it's kind of like the community and like the sense of belonging, because like, yes, I love competing and it's fun to win and whatnot, but for me, what kind of makes the competition is kind of the community and the people that you're competing against and the people that you meet and all of that kind of stuff. Because for me, when I was in high school, I about track as much as I Paralympic experience, because I was competing against people like me, and I wasn't coming in dead last all the time like I was in high school, because when I was younger, it was super difficult for me to accept the fact that I would almost always come in dead last in high school because I was the only disabled athlete on the track. And so coming to Paralympic events and competing, just being with other athletes that are like me kind of just made me want to continue, because if I quit, or it would make me lose that sense of community, and just having that is really important.
Okay, great. We'll wrap this up. Thank you to each and every one of our panelists. So appreciate you sharing the stories, and you know, both coach, athlete, and you know, just a quick, we've got it 7 o'clock if anybody wants to do another Zoom. The World Para Athletic Rankings, Bridging the Gap. So, and that's going to be with David Gregg, and Kathy Sellers is moderating. And then the next one on Friday is Using Your Voice as a Pathway to Success from Move United. So we've got sessions going through Sunday afternoon. So hope you'll take a look at that, and thank all of you on this panel, and good luck to each of you. So I will end this. Bye, guys.